Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. I'm Andrew McCula, Senior Housing Fellow at the Pioneer Institute. Honored to be joined today by an amazing panel of experts who are at the heart of efforts to expand opportunities for homeowners to build accessory dwelling units or ADUs on their properties. Let's go alphabetically, shall we? Scott Bailey is the co-founder of Bequall, a modular home builder with a national presence on ADUs and other neighborhood infill housing developments. Amy Dane is a senior fellow at Boston Indicators and a leading expert on zoning policy, land use reform, and housing. Tom Gannett is a project manager at BuildX, a custom home builder based in Carver, Massachusetts, that has completed dozens of ADUs in recent years. And finally, Eric Shupit is the Deputy Chief of Staff at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, the agency that implemented the 2024 law that legalized ADUs statewide. Thank you all for being here, and thank you especially to Groma, a Boston-based real estate development and management firm, for sponsoring this webinar. Not sure I need to say this, but accessory dwelling units are small homes located on the same lot as larger primary or principal dwellings. Often that takes the form of backyard cottages, attic or basement apartments, or garages converted into living spaces. This webinar builds on some research that Pioneer Institute did last year regarding additional reforms to regulations, the permitting process, and lending practices that are necessary to facilitate ADU construction at a scale that rivals that of other states. It's been a little over a year since the state fully implemented the Affordable Homes Act provision that allows ADUs by right in single-family residential districts across the state. Um, Amy, would you like to give a high-level overview of the changes we're seeing in the pace of ADU development and maybe the location of ADU development in the last year?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with this great panel. So I thought I'd start by saying what was the status quo before the law and then talk about what we've accomplished in the last year. So in 2018, I wrote a report actually for Pioneer Institute on regulation of ADUs in Greater Boston. And in that survey of 100 cities and towns just in Greater Boston, I found that there were a third of them that didn't allow ADUs at all. They were just prohibited. And then almost a third of communities allowed ADUs, but only if they were for family members and caretakers, but not for rental. And then just over a third allowed ADUs for rental, but were restricted them in many numerous ways. So you needed special permits in most cases, and there were a lot of like tight restrictions. Statewide, I didn't survey statewide in that report, but I would assume that the numbers are probably worse because in a lot of the small towns, there isn't the planning department and staff and capacity for revising zoning to like allow ADUs. So we may not have seen it even allowed in as many communities at a statewide level. I found that in the 100 cities and towns I surveyed, for those that allowed ADUs, they were permitting them at an average of 3 permits per year. And that was from 2015 to 2017. I surveyed for 3 years the permitting. So now the state allows ADUs as of right statewide, legalized them everywhere. And in the first year, we've seen some really good progress. And I thank Eric and EOHLC for providing me with some numbers. They've been surveying communities on the permitting numbers so I can compare. At least 217 cities and towns have issued permits for ADUs in the last year. That's definitely way more than we were seeing, in the years leading up to it. At least 1,639 ADU applications were submitted in 2025 alone, and at least 1,224 permits were approved for ADUs. So some of those are occupied and some are, in the construction process. Statewide, we are seeing these permits issued in diverse places, and we see the highest numbers in some communities like Lawrence, Newton, Plymouth, Methuen, Barnstable, Amherst. So that gives you a sense of like it's in Western Mass and the Cape and Greater Boston. And what I'm seeing, because I mentioned before, we were seeing 3 permits per year just in the minority of communities that were allowing ADUs. And now this is averaging out for those communities that reported their numbers, 4 units per community. So that's definitely like an uptick, not massive, but there's definitely like an uptick in the permitting levels per community, but then a much bigger uptick in the number of communities that are in that category. So this is great. It's definitely like, I think the big takeaway here and in other types of zoning reform that we're seeing is that zoning reform works. You allow housing production and you get more housing production. Zoning reform is necessary. It's not sufficient. We'll talk about that more today, that there are other things that we need to do to see numbers even higher. And there are more steps in zoning reform that we could go through to allow these even more generously, liberally, to see more production. But it's a good start. And the one other thing I wanted to flag in terms of takeaways is that what we're seeing and what EOHLC has been reporting is that there are a lot, building departments are getting a lot of calls, like sometimes multiple calls a day from homeowners who are interested in this. So a lot of people are investigating it, thinking about it. Oh, and then the one other thing, and let others go on, but that in terms of that, this zoning reform is necessary but not sufficient. In seeing these, we know that the cost of construction is high, so the state has been working on launching construction finance loans for low and moderate income households to take advantage of these opportunities, and also supporting MHP and launching an outreach and education technical assistance program to homeowners to help them out too. And then maybe further in this conversation, we can also talk about things like septic system regulations and stormwater and fire and building codes and other things that definitely are coming up for homeowners as they think about, what can work and what's the cost of this going to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Amy, for that broad overview and also for kind of setting the agenda here.
Yeah.
I should have said earlier, please ask any questions you have in the chat. I see some folks are already partaking in that, but we will leave about 10 or 15 minutes for questions at the end. Um, so let's dive in a little deeper. We also want to understand how these changes are affecting people on the ground. Tom, I understand a lot of your clients are building ADUs for family members, people in their lives who need housing. Can you talk about how you work with individual homeowners to serve those needs?
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning. There's a lot of information, Amy, to top on that. So I will go ahead and try my best. So yeah, for the most part, we over here at BuildX do a very extensive pre-construction process that ranges from working with the engineer to get the septic and sewer tie-ins on the lot correct, the location of it. We do a selections process as well, which range from meeting with the client to pick out, all their flooring, their countertops, their cabinets, all their finishes, working with the plans to make sure the plans are exactly what they want, because granted, we do offer a wide variety of base step plans, but everything that we offer is completely customizable. Take away a bathroom, add a half bath if acceptable. Prime example, we do have a client that we just finished one up with. They had an autoimmune disease where they were very allergic to adhesives. So we could not do spray foam insulation. We could not do Advantech. We could not do zip panels for the siding and the roof. So we basically did Roxel insulation throughout. We did the old school 1x shiplap for the subfloor, plywood, or not plywood, for the wall sheeting as well. So based on the client's needs, we can meet them, whether it needs to be ADA compliant. We do offer as well the roll-in units, one-piece fiberglass. We do all of our ADUs with those units. Just adds that extra ease of usage. But for the most part, everything that we do with the clients are all customizable and tailored to their needs, to whatever those needs may be.
Wonderful. That's a really important, business model that fits that niche of people with very specific needs. Scott, your business model is a little different. You're using prefabricated or factory built units most of the time in your work. what are some of the benefits of that construction method and also the challenges relative to custom on-site home building like BuildX does?
I think there's a lot of need and a lot of different strategies for, you know, depending on what goals you're trying to accomplish. The way I look at modular is you're having 50% of the project done offsite. And like Tom can still do modular projects, right? Just because he's stick building doesn't mean he can't do it. So I think it's an accessible opportunity for lots of general contractors, homeowners, investors. Um, like when I think about the benefits, it may be 10% lower hard costs than stick built, but really the benefit of modular is it's being built inside to a good quality from a proven manufacturer. And the benefit of that then becomes predictability, speed, and less disruption on site. So, like if you're trying to optimize for other things, those are really the benefits. I don't say you're going to save 30% of your hard costs, but I do think you will save time. And because of the way state certification works for the modules, regardless of where the factory comes from, they have to be approved in the state by a third party agency. So the benefit of that then becomes the local municipality submits that, or you submit it to the local municipality, but the state already approved that part of the plan. So then the municipalities focus on the site plan, the utility connections, how the unit attaches to the foundation. So it kind of reduces the municipality scope, which can create challenge or confusion, but that's the education, right? Um, but I'd say overall, like you get a more predictable product at a more predictable price point. It's firm fixed pricing. So like you just know that it's gonna be there. And it creates a more standardized scope of work for what has to happen on site. So there's more predictability there too. The trade-off is you don't get as much customization. You but for I think a lot of people, price is a big thing. And I think kind of peace of mind and having things handled is a big thing, especially if you're a homeowner. One thing I did notice is like the stats Amy gave about how many permits were applied for, and it just made me think, wow, basically in a year, Massachusetts created a $20 million, architectural industry for permit submissions, which kind of says a lot. That's just the very beginning. Like these things, come months after when you submit or even the work starts. So if you had if 1,000 submissions and just recently, you may be on track for double that or more in the coming year or so. So it just kind of says like there is a wave, and there's more education and like more people become familiar, and some of the standard deviation confusion that's happening right now goes away. I think you'll see more and more. And we saw it in other states like California, where adoption basically went through the roof. If you look on it, like a 7 to 9 year timeline. And I'm sure, I don't want to speak for Eric here, but I'm sure the state has what we see in most places, like there are additional bills that come to help clean up the language or offer support to municipalities or things like that. That could be education and things that just start to open up that opportunity. So I think the other big thing that Massachusetts has related to modular is I do think that there is a lot of interest in modular. So whether you're doing something in a more local factory or connecting to factories in the New England region, I do think that it's a big opportunity. And the last thing I'll clarify about modular is it is built to state and local building code. So like one thing that's like pretty important is that it meets what most municipalities will really care about. I can't tell you the number of people who call me and say, I just saw the Mars pod, I can buy it from China for 30 grand. And I said, well, you can't put it anywhere. So I think some of the things that people just have to remember is there's different levels of regulatory scrutiny on the builds. And, for me, I've been very focused on volumetric modular, which means the whole unit comes to meeting state and local building codes, stretch energy codes, and it gets approved by that local municipality in its final space. It's not HUD like a mobile home or RV. And so the quality really feels like very, very good. So So anyway, that's the last thing I'll leave you with. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So it does sound like there's a trade-off here between the customizability of the ADU and how predictable it is to kind of deliver it, with a standardized process, especially around the time. But I think for most individual homeowners, the big question is cost. And it can be very prohibitively expensive to build ADUs, whether it's modular or kind of stick built on site. I've heard quotes ranging from, 250,000 to $400,000,
Yeah.
depending on what the homeowner wants. So I guess I'll turn to you, Eric, and ask, what's the state's role in helping make some of these homes more financially feasible, and how are you approaching that?
Thanks, Andrew. So, I mean, the administration absolutely recognizes that ADUs are still a significant investment for homeowners. And as a state, we're looking to attack this from every angle. So, we're working to make them more feasible by reducing the regulatory barriers, by addressing the zoning issue, and then also building practical tools that help homeowners move from having the idea of maybe I want to do an ADU to taking it through to construction. So, one of the biggest barriers we see is that many homeowners don't know whether an ADU is even feasible on their property or what it's going to mean to build that, or what it would cost. So we've been working with the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, MHP, a state housing quasi agency, on a new ADU incentive program that's really focused on that early staged. The MHP program's backed by about $10 million in capital dollars from the state and supports professional feasibility studies for homeowners. Homeowners will be able to work with a pre-qualified architect or design professional that can help that homeowner evaluate their property and prepare an assessment of what are the zoning requirements, what are the site constraints, what utility connections are needed, and then what are the realistic construction cost ranges for their property, for the ADU that they want to build. And the goal is to give homeowners a clear picture of what this project is going to involve before they commit significant amounts of money. If that project looks feasible, the next step is then often looking for financing. And that's where the state's also helping through Mass Housing's ADU loan program, and that's where that comes in. That program is designed to provide fixed rate second mortgage financing specifically for ADU construction. And the Mass Housing program will offer loans of up to about $250,000 for ADUs and available to a broad range of homeowners, up to 135% of the area median income. That's about if you're earning about $200,000 in Eastern Massachusetts. So really helping those aimed at those middle income households who may not have easy access to financing to be able to afford, again, saying, hey, I want to build this thing. Now I need help with financing. We're trying to create those tools that will help them. We know that ADUs are essentially they're small development projects and undertaken by individual homeowners. The pre-development costs can be high. And so we're trying to reduce those barriers step by step. First, again, by helping homeowners understand what is it going to take to do this and is it feasible through MHP's program, and then helping them financing the construction through Mass Housing's loan program.
Thank you, Eric. And I know the state also has a kind of design competition for ADUs, where they're soliciting design proposals, blueprints essentially, for building ADUs. Some folks might say, why do we need a state-sanctioned design for ADUs? Isn't that something homeowners and contractors can figure out between themselves? What's your response to that?
Sure. I mean, this is we're excited for our design challenge that's going on right now. But looking at it again from what do people need to build an ADU? And a lot of homeowners are interested, but they don't always know where to start. What does it look like? What's the upfront design going to be? And that work alone could be a real barrier. So that's one of the reasons why we launched an ADU design challenge. And the goal is to create a set of high quality ADU designs that will be publicly available so that homeowners can start with something that's thoughtfully designed and buildable instead of just starting from scratch. Again, just trying to provide them every little bit of help that we can. It's the challenge itself is modeled after similar efforts in other cities and states that we've seen. And it's a practical way to engage architects and designers in this policy conversation by encouraging innovation and competition in ADU design, raising awareness statewide about what's possible with ADUs, and then importantly, doing this, without a cost to the taxpayers. So relatively low cost way to generate useful tools and ideas and inspiration for ADUs. And I think what's important is that these submissions that will get through the challenge aren't just conceptual ideas. They're going to have real floor plans, elevations, construction details, and be consistent with the Massachusetts building and energy codes and typical zoning constraints. The designs themselves also have to show how an ADU will fit on a realistic Massachusetts lot, so homeowners can see and visualize what might actually work on their property. Um, that will help reduce some of the upfront design costs and uncertainty that often stop projects before they begin. So instead of hiring a designer and starting with a blank sheet of paper, a homeowner can go download this design and from a professional designer, and then work with the building architect to adapt it to their site. I think more broadly, if we want ADUs to scale beyond one-off projects, we really need to make tools that make them easier to replicate. And these standardized designs can help create more predictability, not just for the homeowners, but also for builders and permitting officials who'll become familiar with these designs. You know, should this be a role of the state? We're not saying there's a state mandated design. These plans are completely optionals, and homeowners can still work with any architect or designer that they choose. But we think that this will just be another thing that we can make available that will make the process more approachable for a homeowner who might be doing anything like this for the first time. So again, just fitting into that broader effort to make ADUs more workable in practice. So designing to help homeowners get started, the MHP program to help them understand what's feasible and how much it's going to cost, and then the mass housing program to come in and say, okay, let's help you build this thing. So again, that holistic approach to making more ADUs happen in Massachusetts.
Right. Well, thank you, Eric. I think we've covered a good deal about the process of getting ADUs built. But I think we also need to cover the barriers to building ADUs that still exist, on the local level because of, the regulatory environment. Amy, you've done a lot of research on policy reform items for ADUs. How do we continue to break down some of the barriers that exist, whether it's dimensional requirements, things like setbacks or what have you?
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I wanted to just add one other item to the overview I gave up front is that one thing I found in my survey in 2018 that there were only 16 of 100 cities and towns I surveyed that allowed detached ADUs in particular. There was just an assumption that ADUs were going to be interior in the house or attached to the principal dwelling unit. And now not only are we allowing statewide ADUs by right, but we're allowing them detached or attached or interior. And we're seeing that about half of the applications are for detached ADUs, and about half so far have been internal or attached. So that was just like an interesting point to me. But yeah, I think one of the lessons from California I keep hearing, and with their great levels of production, is that they didn't say this is once and done reform. It was like year by year they were learning and doing continual improvement of their regulatory frameworks. And I think that is a good example for us in Massachusetts, and to look at what's happening and to be getting continual feedback from building departments and homeowners about and architects and builders about what's going on and what are remaining barriers. And I'm actually working on a report right now for Boston Indicators at the Boston Foundation, looking at this too. I think one area to look at is where we can continue to pull back some of the zoning restrictions. That could be, it's interesting around setbacks. That are required for like rear setbacks, side setbacks, front setbacks. What the state said in the regulations on the implementation of this is that they have like this 3-level standard on it. And that is that you look at what are the setbacks required for the principal structure, and what are the setbacks required in local zoning for an accessory structure, and whichever is less, smaller, is what applies to your ADU. But then there's this third standard that is just of reasonableness, where the law was meant to not unreasonably restrict ADUs. So like that leaves a little bit of discretion to the local building department that, say there is no small 5-foot setback for an accessory structure and you've got a 25-foot setback, rear setback, and you can't really build a detached ADU given your property dimensions with that setback. The building department does have the discretion to say maybe that's not a reasonable requirement, and you could, even though there's a 25-foot setback, still add an ADU. But this is like a hard thing, I think, for homeowners to negotiate and figure out. And what if the building inspector says that the 25-foot setback is reasonable? And, is the homeowner going to then go to court and have that challenged at that cost and unpredictability? So I think that that's an area where we could tighten things up, perhaps through statutory reform or potentially just in the regulatory reform where we make it clearer what the setback standards are. Another thing is, and not to go into too much detail, but the law said that protected ADUs that are legalized statewide can be 900 square feet or half the floor area of the principal dwelling, whichever is smaller. And it just felt like an unnecessary point. We could have just legalized 900 square feet ADUs everywhere, and it doesn't really matter if your principal dwelling unit is, 1,400 square feet, that you have to do a smaller one. It makes it messier in terms of how we are measuring the square footage of the primary dwelling unit and the attached one. And I think it would just be more straightforward and a little more generous to allow 900 square feet. We could look at condoization. We should be allowing it. Our rules around site plan review so that these aren't getting stopped up through that process. We could look at what the rules are around second ADUs or additional ADUs. And then there are all these other requirements. I did a report for the Pioneer Institute back in 2006 on septic system regulations and found that many cities and towns have their own regulations that supplement the state's Title V, meaning there are just 100 different septic regulations in Greater Boston. And I think that that would be a great area to pull back, if not pulling them back in general for housing construction, pulling back the local ability to add additional requirements for septic systems really as they relate to ADU development. So that's something to be looking at. And then there are questions about fire codes and building codes and energy codes and stormwater requirements. And all of these come into play and are things on at one level, there can be education on best practices with the building officials at cities and towns. And at other levels, there may be need for, longer term reforms to the codes and convening of, experts to figure out what our codes should be for these to make sure that the codes really make sense and are protecting public health and safety while not adding unnecessary costs to development. So I think that there's definitely a lot of work for us to do now that we've done that first step of legalization to think through what really makes this feasible for homeowners and builders and architects and everybody.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Amy. And
Yeah.
Tom and Scott, similar question for you. What are you seeing with your clients about the pain points that could be addressed with further regulatory reform?
Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback off of what Amy said. I'll dig a little bit deeper. The 900 square footage, or the GFA, the gross square footage for these ADUs, there's not very much consistency through the towns in Massachusetts. So for instance, as Amy said, up to 900 square feet or 50% of the primary residence, square footage of the primary residence. A lot of the towns, if you have a basement that's higher than 6'7", they will count that basement towards that square footage of the existing house. Some towns, they will, if it's at 6'7" from the floor joist to the bottom of the slab, they'll count it. But if they have an LVL beam that goes across, some towns will count the bottom of the LVL beam to the finished slab, and they will not count it. So there's just some consistency on actually determining what size ADU you can build, and kind of branching off of that, when we go into the design of these ADUs, it states in the ADU regulations that garages are not counted towards the square footage, decks are not counted towards the square footage, covered porches or similar spaces are not counted towards the square footage. So when we're doing the design for these plans and we go and we submit for the permit, we have a lot of towns that are, some are all 80, ADU positive. They're like, absolutely not a problem, go for it. And then there's some that are like, well, I'm counting this unconditioned staircase that's covered that grants you access from the garage to the ADU as square footage, even though it's not technically livable space. But there's a lot of gray area when it comes to actually determining what should be counted as the square footage for these ADUs. And that's one of the biggest pain points right now for us getting through the permitting process.
Tom, can I ask you just as follow-up on that? Do you feel like it's important if there were like a revisiting of the statutory language to even, should we be pushing to expand 900 square feet allowed to like 1,000 square feet or 1,200 square feet? Like, do you think that's making a difference in people's decision to build these, that they're like, it's not worth it if I can only do 900 square feet? Or do you feel like 900 is good for the basic statewide legalization and cities and towns can go beyond that if they want to?
Yeah, so there is a few towns already that adopted the ADUL, which is that up to 1,200 square feet. I know Marion has, Bridgewater has. Definitely, it piques more interest, what we found, because it's more area, more what you can do with 900 square feet. That's comfortable enough for a 2-bedroom, 1 bath. You can do a lot with 900 square feet from what we've seen. But definitely, the option of going higher. Obviously, a lot of the neighbors don't really care for it, but if it fits a need and it gives somebody more access or capability, because once you get into the ADA requirements, you need a lot more space. So between the cabinets, the doors need to be bigger. You need ramps. You need the bathrooms to be more accessible. You need more space around the toilets. It just eats up a lot of space. So I would definitely say would be more of a advantage, I would say.
One way I would answer is like, I do think it's all about the money. And a simple napkin math framing for people to help figure out whether or not they think they should do this is look at the median income in your area and take 30% of that and divide it by 12. And if you don't think you can get that rent for the unit that you're putting out, probably, even if you're not going to rent it, it's going to be hard for you to like build that and then get the value you hope for it. Whether it's an appraisal, I saw that question come through. So that's a real, like, just like getting your kind of head wrapped around the numbers on that. And then let's say you are going to do it as a rental. Let's say you do a studio. Let's say it rents for $1,800 a month. Your NOI on that is $14,000 basically. So after taxes and expenses. So if you took like just the current mortgage rate at 6%, like that means you've got to be able to build your entire ADU full cost done for about $234,000 to just be break even with your mortgage. And that's assuming you got a new one and not a HELOC, which is going to be more expensive. So I think you either have to choose to do it in cash today. There's not like like the way I'm seeing people do it otherwise is, relooking at, refining out or cash out refining maybe an investment property or their existing primary. But it's still kind of a challenge in general to get financing around it because there aren't comps in the market that support it. Again, like there's probably 2 ADUs permitted in the last 5 years or something in all of Massachusetts, and there's 1,000 permits going out, and people are going to say, how do I value this? And they're not going to know how to do it. They're going to try and compare it or discount it to a lesser, older product. It's not new construction. So I think there's like a lot that has to be done. That's not me trying to be negative. That's just trying to be grounded in like the realities of decisions that people need to make so that they don't go too far out on their skis. Like before you even submit a permit, you're probably going to be out $30,000 to $50,000 between like a site plan, call it 10 grand, foundation plan, architectural designs, just the permit package itself and getting all of that organized, whether or not you're hiring a GC or helping, or you're doing it yourself and trying to get a project manager, like there's quite a bit of expense. So like you won't, even if you do get a loan, you have to pay that in cash. So the question is, do you feel comfortable putting $25,000 to $50,000 out on a project? And then how are you being most efficient about the ways this is going to happen? And so I think in general, I just say that to try and keep it grounded. And I'm very optimistic. I think this is an important policy. It's part of a portfolio of solutions that I think need to be, implemented across the state. But at the end of the day, like what I have also learned is like it really comes down to the numbers. And I think one of the things that, especially for a homeowner that maybe hasn't done development, you are building a single family home. And that is quite complicated and hard. And you've got vendor selection, you've got scope gap analysis to do, you've got budgets to create, you've got contracts to read and write. So like you, just to kind of give you an idea, it's almost 15 stakeholders that you have to manage if you're owner building. And each of them have their own needs, communication, payment schedules. So it's just a lot. And so I think the opportunity in this industry is about simplifying and clarifying that and helping to kind of make that customer journey really seamless. And it sounds like, from what I read about Tom and what I'm hearing him talk about, like they're helping do that. Like that's a really important part of that model, is making it easy for people to do. If I just go and give my 2 cents on policy, I do think like the opportunity here is to probably go bigger, maybe 1,200 square feet. You could get small 3-bed, 2-baths, which could be starter homes. And I want to say that I think if you think about the use cases, I was reading some of the Q&A here, everyone kind of thinks like they're just going to build it. But at that price point, you really have to have a purpose. So use cases I'm seeing that get a lot of traction is parents moving into the ADU and downsizing, and then giving it to their young family, the primary, because the family can't own a property. Like they can't buy the single family home at the prices that they are today. The other one that I'm seeing is either the homeowner wants to downsize in the ADU and travel and then rent it, so they get even more income. So if you thought about a return perspective, if you're building for $230,000, but you're renting your primary at $3,000 to $4,000 a month, that's an incredible return, right? So like, I think people are starting to say like, we've got to make the economics work, and I've got to like make my lifestyle work or my family's lifestyle work. And the evolution of what home will be is much more than just where one family lives. It's where you work now. It's where you rent and get income. Like people are probably gonna, rent out their pools and rent out storage spaces. Like all of these services are now available. So like there's just a lot there. And I think that if the state and even local municipalities continue to like meet this evolution of what home is, there's a lot of great policy that can come from that. So smaller, gentle density. There's a lot of municipalities with larger parcels. So we're not talking like downtown Boston, but we're talking, in suburbs where someone's sitting on an acre. There's a lot that you could do with that. And so I would just, I think Eric and the team have been amazing at kind of listening and responding to like where both the municipalities are. There's a lot of them, and also like what's needed to meet the goal. So I just great job, Eric, on everything you guys have been doing, and keep it up. I'm hoping that there will be a roadmap that we can all visualize and then support to kind of continue the great work you're doing.
Well, thank you, Scott. So,
I just wanted to point out, based on that, is those upfront costs that Scott was talking about is a major reason why it's so important that we legalized ADUs as of right. Can you imagine spending those tens of thousands of dollars on that initial work while you don't even know if you can get a permit? And the as of right zoning makes that predictable, so if your proposal, your application, meets the stated requirements.
wow. Thank you all for that conversation so much. I do want to circle back on something that has come up a couple of times in the conversation, but I think we should drill down on. and that's the septic system capacity in places that don't have centralized sewer systems and how that affects the potential for ADU development, especially in areas where building an ADU might trigger extensive septic system upgrade requirements related to environmental protection. I'm thinking of the kind of nitrogen sensitivity requirements on much of Cape Cod, which I think is a naturally good place for ADUs because you have a lot of seniors, a lot of workforce accommodation issues in the housing stock. Eric, I don't know. I know you don't represent the Department of Environmental Protection, but especially on Cape Cod, how do we balance the septic system, environmental issues with the need to adequately house, our mother-in-laws and other people who need ADUs?
Sure. So, I mean, we absolutely recognize that septic capacity is one of the real practical constraints on ADU development in areas without that sewer service. The ADU regulations are clear that ADUs still need to comply with Title V, which governs our septic, sewer and septic requirements. And in some cases, that can trigger system upgrades that cost more money. One of the ways that we're addressing this is by working closely with Mass DEP. I certainly don't speak for them, but to make sure that there are clear and workable compliance pathways, and working with them to issue specific guidance on how Title V applies to ADUs so that homeowners and local officials can have as clear an understanding as possible of how existing systems can be evaluated, when upgrades might be necessary based on state standards, and then in providing clear guidance where we can to help homeowners avoid unnecessary upgrades or better understand lower cost compliance avenues to comply. We really do hear a lot of practical questions from homeowners and communities without sewers who are trying to understand whether they can connect an ADU to an existing system or how bedroom-based septic sizing works in practice. And these questions really highlight that septic capacity can be a limiting factor, even when a project is otherwise allowed. Now, I'll point out that Title V isn't the only framework that applies to septic systems. Many municipalities, and Amy alluded to this, many municipalities have their own local septic regulations that set higher performance standards than Title V, often to address local environmental conditions. We see that certainly on the Cape. The ADU regulation includes what we call the reasonableness test, which helps ensure that requirements that go beyond Title V, such as larger tanks or leaching fields, are tied to legitimate environmental needs and are reasonable for the specific project. So there is some protection built into the existing regulation. More broadly, to your question, Andrew, our goal is to strike the right balance. ADUs are typically small incremental additions, housing an additional family member, a caregiver. And so we want to make sure that there are absolutely pathways so that we can build those ADUs while still maintaining strong environmental protections, which are absolutely necessary. And so as we've implemented the ADU laws, sewer and septic and utility issues also are among the areas where we're hearing lots of feedback. And we're continuing to work with DEP and municipalities and looking at where additional guidance or regulatory clarification could make the process easier, more predictable, and workable. And regulatory updates are certainly a possibility as we identify opportunities to improve things. I'll just mention in support of that, we also have been actively asking for input from building inspectors and other municipal staff. We're hosting focus groups with these folks, with the inspector community, that will help us better understand the challenges that they see as they work with homeowners. And we know that insight of the people responsible for administering ADU permits will be really valuable as we work to increase adoption and building more ADUs. So we know that implementation always reveals issues that aren't fully predictable on paper when we're writing these regulations. And so we're continuing to refine this framework based on real world experience and are open to making updates.
I had heard on the Cape that there's like a possibility for urinary diversion toilets. Is that something like Andrew or Eric or others have heard about as a
Yeah.
possibility? So it's like an alternative instead of like the extreme cost of upgrading sewers or dealing with septic systems, which it's hard with the specific situation on the Cape. This is like an alternative where you just divert the urine so it's not going into the soil.
I've also heard about that. The upside is it could be a lower cost option for homeowners to treating their wastewater compared to, I think it's the, kind of alternative septic system requirement that does have a kind of nitrogen, um, cleaning agent attached, which my understanding, I don't want to, make up numbers here, is it costs like well into five figures to upgrade your septic system that way and potentially more. So I don't know if, again, Eric, you're not DEP, but I think there are probably some, you know, I think it's probably under consideration somewhere in the state government right now.
Yeah, I can't, I wouldn't be able to comment just that I'm not familiar, but I have heard of innovative approaches to things like that, I mean, this is just me speaking. I think we need to look at any and all of these innovations to help us build ADUs or just more housing in general.
Right. Well, thank you. I think, it's past time we look at some of the many good questions in the chat. One I want to touch on right away. Bill says, Amy mentioned condoization. Can the panel expand on that? What are we learning from other states about whether single-family owners can recoup their construction costs if condoization is an option? How does it change the math and, from the state's perspective, the volume of new units, hopefully affordable units? I mean, I think I will say, that's been a policy reform that's on my mind. I think we've seen in a lot of other areas that have allowed ADUs to be sold separately from the primary dwelling unit. It turns them into relatively low cost homeownership opportunities relative to new detached homes that are built. Seattle is a good example of that. It still comes out pretty expensive, but, from the bank's perspective also, it could help you finance an ADU better because the turnaround, the kind of return you're getting from being able to sell it is much faster and potentially more predictable because you have a longer time frame when you're renting it out for when you're subject to the payback period.
Andrew,
And
my
the other,
just
oh,
my
please.
quick thought on just I don't want to go too far off of something I want to caveat, which is it creates a lot of complexity. You have an existing homeowner that has to agree to put their property in title. They have an existing loan that needs to approve that conversion. You're discounting the value of the now primary home. You are also now needing to create a new condo doc that the existing lender agrees to and the new lender agrees to in the purchase and understanding of that. And I'm not saying it's bad, but it is complicated and it does introduce some challenges. And like something that I just want to hit because I think it's super important. I'm really frustrated with like branding in this industry overall. It's so frustrating. But the idea that the ADU could sell for less and it's more affordable. I want to peg that just against where it is because it will now, it's just a smaller footprint. So it's creating a new price point on its primary comp. So like that's a really important distinction. It's just you're creating a new price point. You're not creating a more affordable unit, if that makes sense, because really like the way it's valued is it's a decreased size of unit compared to what the primary is likely being priced and valued at. This is a good thing, but it's an important distinction so that people don't get confused about what it actually costs to build these things. So I think just a conversation about you have a cost to build, you have a land cost associated with it as well if you're selling that condo off. So there's still something there. And for example, if let's say the primary sells and you have a comp for that or another small unit, and that's $300 a square foot, but your cost with the land and to build was $250, you can make $50 a square foot when you kind of come out on the other side of that. So there's a difference between an entry cost and an exit value. And then I think just making sure you parse out how value is being attributed between a primary and an ADU is super important. So anyway, sorry, it's just small stipulations, but they can make or break a project. So
Yeah.
just want to say that.
I appreciate that, Scott, and I'll also say that, when we're talking about kind of a lower price point coming out the other side, in Seattle, it's still maybe $700,000 on average. And it's just that other single family homes that are built on new lots are going for 1.5 million. So it's not, solving the affordability issues. You're right about that.
And really, the thing is, like, because you can't build in mass until now, the value is not in the structure, it's in the land. And that's like a really important thing to note as well. So like if it's selling for 700, the cost to build the structure in most people's homes, cases for home, if you were to start from scratch, is not what you're buying that land like that at. So if you're buying a $1.5 million piece of land with an existing single family home on it, the majority of the value is the land. Because the cost of building that structure was nothing when they built it compared to what it is today. And so I do think it being able to lot split or do some other things like SB9 in California allows you to split a lot and create another primary. You just cut the value, the cost of the land per unit in half. So that is an important kind of distinction when you're doing like the kind of math on these numbers. In order to lower costs, your costs to build are going to be your costs to build. So then the only way you can get at it is how do you change the cost of land? If you're building one single family home on a lot that costs $1 million, you've got the land at $1 million and whatever it costs to build. If you can build 10 small, like ADU, like I say it from a policy, but like 10 small single family homes, you just made the cost of the land per unit 100 grand. So I think that's how you start to get at affordability. And new price points, because you're attacking something that can be directly attributed to the total cost on a per unit basis.
So, Scott, do you think that's something we should be looking at here is regulatory reform to enable more lot splitting, like for the
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, like that's why I keep hinting at the roadmap, and this is my opinion, but like I think we have to be getting, and this won't work in every market, right? Like Greater Boston might be hard because it's smaller parcels, but like neighborhoods when they're started generally have similar parcel sizes because that's how it was split up. But I think if you target places with larger lots and allow them to be split, but you kind of can make this a statewide thing, there's a lot of benefit. In California, you can build up to 10 single family homes on a single family lot by right. And you have to go through the subdivision map act and subdivide those into separate parcels. But like that has a meaningful change. The challenge is all of the fees and impact costs that they are attributing to a larger single family home still apply. So like you might be in a place like Sacramento County in California and you have $60,000 of fees per unit. So that starts to add up. So I think you can't just attack a subdivision or like the right to subdivide. You have to attack the framework for fee calculation against it as well. And then like, what are they trying to incent? And by right is helpful, but it still might not lower the costs because if there's other fees that are being attributed to a more kind of quote unquote normalized idea of a single family home, that's a fixed price per unit that you're not getting any efficiency in that per unit number, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for walking us through that, Scott. We
Yeah.
have about 5 minutes left and a few dozen questions from the audience. So why don't we try to rapid fire some of these? What percent of total cost is the zoning and permitting? How much does it vary from town to town? Is there a chance to offer town incentives to have an ADU fast track?
Yeah, so I'll actually chip in on that one. So I mean, again, it completely varies town to town. Each town has a different price per square foot for their permits. So like, for instance, Freetown, to permit an ADU, just the building permit itself was like $500. But if you go to Plymouth, it's $3,500 for the building permit. So each town's vary significantly. Every town does have a fee schedule on their website, on their town website. Normally it's located underneath the building department on that town website. So you can definitely take a look at that and see what they charge per square foot, or sometimes they go by per thousand of the build cost. But it varies town to town. We've done, permitting from all the way from site engineering to do the zoning permit to the building permit. I believe Scott kind of chipped on that. It's, can vary from 15 to 25,000, give or take. It's all based on what town you're in and what their fee schedule is like.
Thank you, Tom. That's good to know. Someone says, I'm at the Cape and in a flood zone. Is that something that would rule out ADUs?
No, it would not. We have a few actually in Rockland that is on the water. We just have to go through conservation committee. We just have to comply with all flood zone regulations. Normally, if you're on the water or on the ocean, if they're going to require, flood vents in the basement, or if it's got to be elevated for X amount of, water raising, it's just you got to make sure you're in or off of the wetland or water setback in that flood zone. You can't go obviously onto the buffer zone, but if you have enough area outside of that buffer zone and it's still considered in the flood zone, it's got to get through the conservation committee and be good to go.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. And I think probably the last question we have time for here. We've run into a conflict between the ADU regulations and the state sanitary code, which governs rentals. As an example, unless a bedroom is at least 120 square feet, it cannot be rented to two people, only to a single person. It's not a problem if the ADU is built to the full 900 square feet, but is a major problem for smaller ADUs under the 50% rule. So I think the question is, is there anything in the works at HLC that might look at resolving that kind of conflict?
So I can't, sorry, I can't speak specifically just like to that particular issue. That's the first time I'm hearing of it. That doesn't mean others here haven't talked about it. But these are exactly the kinds of things that we like hearing as issues as we implement and move forward. Because as I talked about, one of our main priorities right now is listening. We're a year into this law, having the regulation out there, listening, seeing where clarifications and improvements might be needed, and then we can look at what are we able to do. And as I mentioned earlier, we are open to looking at the regulation, revisiting that, and seeing if there are updates that we can make to address some of these issues.
Thanks, Eric. And so I'd like to request, if possible, if someone on my team can download the Q&A and maybe we can circulate them afterwards and get some more answers to folks. We really do have a lot of great questions in the chat. But for now, we are basically out of time. Thank you again to our panelists for their time and insights. I will say, as I mentioned earlier, Pioneer Institute released a white paper in November discussing the state of ADUs in Massachusetts and offering some recommendations for further reforms that expand homeowners' rights to build them. It's called Beyond Legalization: How Regulatory Reform, Standardized Appraisals, and Public Engagement Can Multiply the Impact of ADUs in Massachusetts. There's the link in the chat. And I thank you again to Groma for sponsoring this webinar, and for all the attendees for your interest and engagement. Please check out Pioneer's website for similar upcoming events, pioneerinstitute.org. But for now, have a great day, everyone. Thank you and goodbye.